Adrian, welcome to Circle of Brilliance. Today we are going to answer the emails that I've received in the past several weeks from many of the participants in the Circle of Brilliance who are proposing questions for discussion or topics for us to explore. And so I thought, well, let's use today to answer the mail. So the first one I stumbled across was Brian sent in an email asking if a discussion about the difference between lifespan and health span would be an interesting one for the circle to tackle. And the answer at the beginning of things is, I have absolutely no idea. So you've got to tell us more about I'm guessing what health span is versus lifespan. But tell us what it's all about and why you think it might be a good subject for us.
Well, one of the things I've been looking at since being on these calls is I just simply call it the productive tension of health.
Okay.
And so a lot of focus is on lifespan. So that's the length of years, but not much attention if you think about burnout and all these kinds of great resignation, all these things that are happening with an organization. I don't think a lot of people are focused on health span, which is about quality of life. Because my perspective is, what's the difference? Why would you want to live 100 plus years, which is not going to be an anomaly in today's time, if your quality of life sucks? What's the point?
Right. If lifespan exceeds health span, then what is that? Is that just living or existing, living in misery? That's really not the vital kind of life that we tend to think when we think about our lifespan.
And so I just keep thinking about this idea of the productive tension of health from, my clinical research has been focused on health behaviors and why people won't change. And there's an actual book Alan Deutschman wrote called Change or Die. And part of it is the research from Johns Hopkins of patients who had triple bypass. And I think astoundingly, 60% or more still didn't change their behaviors that produced the first bypass. And so that's not a surgery you just want to continue to have, and it's just not good long term.
Okay.
And he said, even though they had what he called the 3 F's, so they had the force of the situation, the fear of doctors saying, hey, if you don't change your behaviors, you would die. And they had the facts. You just can't keep having that kind of surgery and then not have some significant impact on your lifespan and health span.
Yeah. Interesting. And so I guess, and I'm going to throw this question out to everybody, when we talk about someone being healthy, what does being healthy include for all of you guys? What's being healthy?
When I think of being healthy, I think of 5 things: physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual.
Excellent. Okay.
And you need to have all of those. And spiritual doesn't necessarily mean that it's a religious thing, but it's kind of like a centeredness and a balance. And so in health, if you really look at all of those have to be in balance. And you have to do some interior work, which is, going back to what the gentleman said before, if you have an operation and you don't fix what's inside you mentally, physically, emotionally, and all the other ones, even socially, you have to change, because there were things that that the individual was doing socially that's not real kosher. So you got to look at all of those.
Absolutely.
Really interesting. And so I've got a question about those 5, and then if we can just take a couple of minutes to play with them. Where do they live on the change grid? So when you're talking about people, you even use the word, there's got to be balance in all of them. So I hear that a bunch of them would really be in the center of the change grid. But you mentioned one that was about social. So tell me a little bit more about social.
I think of social as being, right now I'm doing, Rotary does a lot with human trafficking. Yeah. And if you think about it, you need to be somewhat a judger to be able to have good discernment.
Mm,
So there has to be some of that analytical, amiable analytical, so that there's a balance of both of those. But you have to also have some driven. And so to me, that social is kind of in the middle,
yeah.
because you need to have the discernible, the amiable, and the analytical, and the driver. You need to have that for social, because there's people, my mother used to say, I don't think you should socialize with them, or I don't want you to go out with that person, and there could be reasons that she just didn't want to give us. And I have to tell you, they were pretty right on,
Yeah.
even though I was ticked off at the time. But,
Of course.
that helped me become a better discernible person.
Mhm.
And I don't think kids are always given that now.
Oh, I
No.
You make that decision. Hey, that takes a lot of experience and a lot of questioning that kids don't have that today.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And so
And
let me just finish one thing off there, Brian, because I want to pull you in for the another question about health. So you said that one of these 5 ways that health includes is about true physical health.
Yeah.
So where on the change grid do you think someone actually experiences optimal physical health? And that's a question for all of you. Do you think it's a center of the change grid? Do you think it's slightly one way or another? Where do you think a truly healthy person needs to keep themselves, again, just about that physical health sort of part
I
of it?
think they live between the center of the change grid and the green circle.
Going what direction?
Probably going out.
Going out. Now, I agree completely, but I have my own reasons for it. But Brian, you're the resident doctor on the call. So what's the medical reason why health needs to have some driver energy?
well, we know from research about the idea of movement, right? So these are lifestyle medicine, the idea of, I don't want to call it exercise, but just some kind of functional movements. You got to keep the body moving. It regenerates cells, that aids sleep, that aids a lot of different aspects of life in and of itself. Breathing, those things, all these things kind of reset the body. Like even when people have a fracture and they put on what's called a walking cast, right? Like before medical school, I used to work with private orthopedic surgeons. You put on a walking cast and people say, okay, yeah, but my foot is broken. Yeah, but the walking actually promotes the healing.
Sure. Yep. It makes it stronger than it was before.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you need that physicality aspect. And I think that was T that was talking. I love what she talked about, the social part of things, because that's what's missing in health right now, that at least my opinion, that they don't teach in America, is this idea of social determinants of health. That's 80% of health in and of itself. So in other words, your environment, I call it community as medicine. You know, the relationships impact you. And a lot of doctors tend to not. I wrote a essay about in medical school, this idea beyond the diagnosis, you have to meet the humanity of the patient. You have to see them socially. You have to see the emotion and the mental aspect that you give that comes with that diagnosis. And no physician can experience that like the patient can.
Right. It's unique. And so, T, what were the other 2 we were talking about? Because we said, all right, the social part of it should kind of like be here. Yeah. The health part slightly out grid. The spiritual part very much mid grid. What were the other 2 aspects?
Oh, I'm sorry. I had to stop a telephone call.
No.
Okay, I had physical, mental, emotional. Yeah.
What does mental
Emotional.
include? What is mental and emotional? What does mental include?
I think mental, if you think about competencies, it's that knowledge.
Yeah.
And mental is being able to have the ability to have the strength and the courage to not do certain things. So if I think of what the doctor just said, and that is and you can't really separate all of those, but there is a separation. But I think it's over in it's within the green, but I think it's always, the mental is, it's more of a personal thing.
Yeah, because I was wondering, when you mentioned mental, I was wondering, is that really responding more to us keeping our minds agile and, using our imaginations, using our decision-making skills? I mean, really exercising the brain as if it were a muscle.
Yes, and it's also questioning. If
Yeah,
you don't question, you'll never change.
right.
And
So you
so,
want to be grounded.
yes, yes,
Exactly.
Okay, as you've just
Yeah.
characterized it, that one would be slightly upgrid. So there's a slightly upgrade element of health,
yes.
where we're being more aware of things, creating change, responding to change. So this is where
Mhm.
growth actually occurs. Growth doesn't occur downgrade, growth occurs.
And you need challenges.
Yep.
Mhm.
That's why I think it has to be higher. You need challenges to be able to have growth
Mhm.
and
Yep.
new
In fact,
questions.
that's what help you to when you get to diagnosis, right? The mental capacity aspect of it is going to help you frame it in a way so that you're not a hostage to it. You're not in a what we call amygdala hijack state,
Mhm.
right? You can do something with you can make an informed decision. You can use the ACC parts of the brain, which is the anterior cingulate cortex, where we toggle between something being good or bad consequences. So in other words, our reasoning capacity. You do
Mhm.
not want that to be hijacked when you get to diagnosis.
Mhm.
Mhm. Okay, this is really very interesting. So let me throw out to you. Oh, you also mentioned mental. If mental involves aspects of problem solving and creating
Mhm.
strategies, et cetera, that felt a little analytical as well. So I just wanted to kind of show everybody that health seems to be described in multiple ways that cover the outgrade quadrant, inside of the green circle, and maybe a little bit beyond when it came to that learning
Mhm.
element of it. And that, so this is where health is on the
Mhm.
grid. Does that mean that every place else on the change grid is unhealthy or is increasingly unhealthy to be in? And if that is the case, how does that unhealthiness express itself?
I think health requires one to be an active participant.
Absolutely.
Health doesn't just occur.
Right.
And so when you aren't an active participant, then you're more down grid or in grid about it. You may have the thoughts, but you don't have the active participation. And
Okay.
that's kind of where I find myself.
So in what way does being down grid become unhealthy? How does the unhealthiness
A lack of
express itself?
execution.
Lack of follow
Mhm.
through and execution? Yeah, what else? What else
I
happens
think
down
it's also isolating yourself. When you
Mhm.
isolate yourself, you are not getting some of the stimulus you need to have. And I'm not talking about introverts or extroverts. That's a different thing, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
But when you isolate yourself from, as the doctor said, community and from, that whole thing, you become insular. You turn
Mhm.
inward.
Right.
And it's all about I. So, and it's hard to get out of that when you're not healthy.
Very true. By the way,
Mhm.
doctor is Brian T. So Brian
Oh,
T.
okay. Thank
T.
you. Thank you.
Brian. Yeah. He's in Washington, D.C. You're up in the East Coast, aren't you? Somewhere, T. Where are you at?
I'm in Iowa.
Iowa.
I used to be in New Jersey.
Oh,
I
okay.
think that's heaven you meant to say, what didn't you?
Good point. Good point. Excellent point. I'm glad you knew that.
Oh, I love it.
That's awesome.
Okay, good. All right. Anyway, so so being downgraded, we already know this is where, on the most superficial problems, this is where boredom sets in, complacency, ambivalence. There's going to be reduction in physical activity. There's going to be reduction in what mental activity because they believe their ability is really high and the challenge is low. So everything that needs to be figured out has been figured out. So we become more routine, etc. Can you guys feel how that
Yeah.
might lead to gluttony and being slovenly,
Slovenly, yeah.
there we go.
But you know what I like this, I use these words a lot that you say, T, and that is the illusion of control.
Yeah, right. That's it down here.
You know?
Illusion of control.
And it is an illusion.
Yep. Further downward you go. You move from really being in control and power down to assuming you're still in power because you just were. And so for a while, you kind of feel like you could rest comfortably, but unfortunately, that means you stop paying attention to it. And suddenly the assumption of control becomes an illusion of control because the world keeps changing. And
So let me ask this question, because it seems like, you know, again, I'm still somewhat of an outsider to the American healthcare system because I'm not licensed to practice here, but it seems like the healthcare system in the US is premised downgrade in a way that if you think of business systems, it's a symmetry of information is healthcare, right? So in other words, the patient themselves doesn't always have the information. Very few even have access to their own information in terms of the charts, even though I think it's 96% is supposed to be transitioned to the electronic healthcare record. But you always have to go back to the expert. My perspective of healthcare is about doing what David described. You help patients become more active, take greater control, become active agents in their own health and well-being. That to me will lessen the burden on the healthcare system. But if I always have to go back to the expert, that's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, I would pop in here. This is Kathy. I would just pop in and say, yeah, health, to me, good health is about empowerment, which is why it kind of lives on that part of, yeah, exactly that part of the grid.
Yep.
And the American healthcare system is not about, or at least it hasn't been. It's becoming. It's philosophically becoming, but it's because of its reliance on expertise. It is not about the patient's or the individual's empowerment. It is about again, being told by experts on how to manage and what to do and what to put in your body. So being along the heart line, you know, is to me the height of health within that green circle as we're discussing.
Very good. All right, so obviously we've just said we can see how being too far down grid can be unhealthy and how it might express itself there. What about being too far up grid, or is that the obvious one? Is that
that's the obvious one.
Yeah, you're in a situation with very little ability to put up against the challenge that you face. You're feeling very out of control. And so anyone other than Brian, remember what the big hormone or neurotransmitter is that gets released up here? Further upgrid you are, the more you're going to have something.
Cortisol.
Cortisol.
Cortisol, that's it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so what's wrong with cortisol?
It burns your head.
Yeah, it fries your brain. So, it's great to get you out of the life and death situation, but beyond that,
Curves your
Right, okay.
spine, bends your mind, and keeps the country from winning the war.
there you go.
Glory be.
All right, so Brian, what's the medical part?
Yeah, Shags is so funny. Yeah, but you're absolutely. But see, the thing is, too much cortisol becomes a problem. Too much all at once. I think
Yeah.
T has said on another call before about timing of things, because cortisol is always released in the body for various reasons, and it has its purpose for that. But again, too much all at once, then it becomes deleterious because, as Shags just described, it literally that chemical. Too much all at once literally cooks like inside your body. It's just not healthy at all.
Yeah.
Well, it sends out all the other neurotransmitters
Exactly.
and the and hormones in the body. Just your muscles get tense and
Yeah,
Okay.
it's
heart rate
bad.
goes up.
Yep. And so it's because cortisol is related very much with our fight or flight response. It's a survival mechanism.
Mhm.
And when it gets triggered for no necessary reason, then we experience all of the physical damage and emotional damage that comes from being stressed, I guess. I mean, stressed in all the ways stress means anything. So
Mhm.
it's physically draining, emotionally draining, et cetera. So we don't need cortisol. We don't need.
But it's on the opposite side of that. I know that people who have taken melatonin because they need to have that serotonin, to be able to
Mhm.
relax and sleep. If you have too much of it,
Oh
you
yeah.
can't sleep.
Yep,
Yep.
exactly.
Yeah, it's like we joke and say, you might as well get up, your brain already did.
And see, that's why the body's always seeking, Kathy knows about this from her somatic training. The body's always seeking homeostasis. And so again, once cortisol is released, say, for instance, exercise. Exercise releases cortisol, but you're doing it for a purpose and reason. You're not trying to exercise all day, every day. And soon as cortisol is released, the hypothalamus in the brain emits chemicals to try to balance it. So too much of that, then that system does not work properly, as Shags was just describing. And so now you have these chemicals that are released that are not balanced. And so that begins to, impact the body.
That's why I think a lot of times when people have had any kind of an upgrade experience, an extended upgrade period, maybe even an extended outgrade period, it's like you need a nap. And the nap, more than anything else, gives your body time to reset. Those sorts of
Yeah.
things. It shuts you down for a while, and hopefully you can reboot with the, an improved whatever.
Right. That's why I like what T was describing with those 5 portals there. I think I mentioned that book before from Dr. Jim Lear. He founded the Human Performance Institute, and I did an internship with him down in Orlando. And the Human Performance Institute teaches professional athletes how to manage mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual energy. So he goes by those 4 portals. He wrote the book, That Power of Full Engagement. And in the back of the book, he has the engagement process. But he also took those same principles and started teaching executives how to manage mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual energy. And he was acquired. Johnson & Johnson bought them out. But in my mind, those 5 that T described helps manage this quality of health. And that's why I call it the productive tension of health.
Yes.
Interesting. All right. So we know upgrades unhealthy. You lots of reasons. We can come up with all kinds of conditions. Most of the things that ail humanity are probably responses to upgrade experiences or the upgrade experience itself. Is doing it. Let's go in-grid for a second. So is there any way at all that being in that in-grid energy can end up promoting dis-ease or has its own expressions of unhealthiness around it? So
Yeah, they would never go to the doctor.
yeah, why would they not go to the doctor?
I think they're just in denial.
Yeah.
Okay. I think
Illusion.
part of it's denial. What else?
Would you show that again where you
Right here, this whole in-grid quadrant. So the individual perceives challenges being low to moderately high, but ability also low to moderately high.
Maybe they're thinking, well, you got to die from something.
Yeah, well, and I think what it is the in-grid individual, as they move increasingly in-grid and ultimately arrive at the in-grid danger zone, wishes to draw no attention to themselves whatsoever. They just want to disappear into the wallpaper. They just want to draw as little notice to themselves in any way, shape, or form. Why would they want to retreat, withdraw, vanish?
This is not seer. It looks like I'm looking at the grid. If there's attention that gets drawn to them, then it moves them into like the pre-aware stage, and they absolutely don't want that.
No. And let's think about what kind of things that could be happening here that would make withdrawal a logical choice someone might make.
I think sometimes fear would be part of that. If you have,
Yeah. Yeah.
if you have to look at yourself, you don't really want to look at that sometimes. And it could be, your mental state just won't put you there.
Mhm, mhm.
Is
I
that
think
a space of self-judging or I don't know how to articulate it.
I actually believe this is one of the unhealthiest spots on the change grid.
I would
Probably
say,
more from a mental health perspective than
Mhm.
anything else. Remember that the outgrid danger zone is filled with forward offensive sorts of behaviors, and sometimes offensive behaviors, but offensive sorts of behaviors. And as you move further and further in grid, you become more and more defenses. And the ultimate defense is invisibility. So if you can just disappear, the people that are in the outgrid danger zone tend to be perpetrators in search of a victim. And the in-grid danger zone are victims awaiting a perpetrator or,
Interesting.
enmeshed in a perpetrator. These people have very low self-esteem. So
You
they
know-
don't seek out medical care because they might think they're not worthy of it, or they don't want to bother anybody.
But
when I think about some hoarders and things like that,
Mhm.
they hide behind all of that stuff, and it's a mental thing.
Yep.
Mhm.
Very much.
And they don't want people to see them. And people don't want to see them either,
No.
and they don't want to have to face that. So I don't know. It's a very sad, sick place to be.
It's a very sad, sick place to be. It is a place where you will find the worst expressions of victimization that are possible out there. Remember that every behavior on the change, every behavior that exists has a place somewhere on the change grid where it would naturally occur. And that very victim mindset, whether it's just a situation of the mind or something that's in fact, it's pushing people deeper and deeper into the in-grid danger zone. And so how is that unhealthy? How is that unhealthy?
I think it leads to a lot of I've seen in patients, and we go back to what T was describing in terms of the connectedness or the interconnectedness of the physical, the mental and emotional, spiritual and social, right? So we had patients come in and they would claim, I don't do doctors. Okay, but you're in this particular program because the physicality part of this not doing doctors has now taken over to the point where you're in an emergent situation.
Yeah.
So you don't have a choice but to do doctors at this point. So, this hiding, they created the whole narrative around it. But, for every thought we have, every emotion we experience, the somatic nervous system is going to reveal something in your body and through your body, literally. So it's hard to hide it. You understand they're going through something mentally, but, most physicians only can address the physical part. That's where they start. And that's what we're trying to get them to change.
I think an interesting thing about that kind of an individual wanting to disappear and the behaviors that come along with wanting to disappear, for at least those of us that are a little bit more aware of the emotional state of other people, we would detect that as being problematic right away. I mean, because the person would think about their physiology, the postures they would be taking, all the way they would be using their eyes to engage or to avoid engagement. I mean, we pick up on it super fast. I have to believe that that it's kind of an easy thing for people to detect. And I'm saying that only to say that as much as they desire to disappear, it is in their efforts to disappear that they bring greater attention to themselves. And by the way, if they truly are victimized, they should know that presenting themselves as a cowering, timid, mousy, whatever, is what's fueling the energy of the perpetrator.
Right. Yeah.
And so there's a lot of stuff going on. That's why I just said, I think this is an area of the change grid that probably most of us don't have all that much experience with, because we don't find these people in work settings. They're not sitting in our classrooms when we're doing, business training, because usually they wouldn't have sought out that kind of work. Are they coming to you for private therapy or coaching or something? How do we even have these people come into our awareness? So I think that they're very prevalent. There's a lot of them out there. We just don't find them. We don't really stumble across them in the kind of work that we're hired to do. You guys agree?
Do you think that's a significant portion of the population?
I think it's a significant percentage of the non-working population. I'm saying that just because I don't believe that these people are all that often seeking out jobs that draw attention to them, or where they can't disappear. Like, let's say that you're a victim of whatever sort and you have a full-time job, but the perpetrator is trying, controlling you. How does that affect your ability to get a job, land a job, keep a job? And as the more controlling this individual becomes, the less likely they would be to even allow this person to seek out such things. So again, as T indicated, these are very sad and sick individuals.
I've listened to a lot of human trafficking, well, a lot, okay, 5, and folks lately, and that seems like a lot to me. And some of these, at least 3 of them were very employed. And they're in the workforce, but there's things that are holding them back.
Yeah.
Yes, I read Tim White's thing about shame and self-judgment, but they're also holding things like their children and their nieces and nephews
And their
at
documents.
hostage.
Right.
But they're working and they're employed, but they just haven't been able to get out of this situation.
I would agree with that, T. I like that comment. I don't think they're all, and I don't think that they're most necessarily unemployed. I think that they are in situations where they feel trapped. They might be in situations where they can't move, or they're move upwardly, or in terms of income or into greater status for their own personal reasons. They are probably at the lower ends of the spectrum in terms of, socioeconomic, skilled labor, the labor market, et cetera. I mean, I think some are unemployed, but I think there are a lot of silent employed people who are in that situation and feel trapped and are there somewhere in that portion.
In fact, that might be what part of the Great Resignation is about at some point, because the pandemic has been blamed for a lot of things, but for people who, as T and Kathy were talking about, where they're hiding inadequacies through the work they're doing, or through the medium of work, then they create this narrative that just continues to grow. They're really not dealing with the issues at hand, and so that's kind of like that apparent stress situation, because when these patients will come in and we take their vitals, they have this narrative, but their vitals are off the chart. I mean, so it's not, it's showing up physically somewhere in some in some way for most of them, although they claim to not be experiencing it.
Right.
I would be curious to know how many of these people are obese, have heart issues.
And some of them even were, to your point, Kathy, some of them were what we call skinny fat.
Yes.
So, they're slim, but they have fat inside. And see, that's from the cortisol and things that was left unchecked.
Interesting. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, and so if we take a look at the Ingrid quadrant, obviously part of the Ingrid quadrant is inside of the green circle. So we're saying, like, even in a perfectly healthy, balanced, harmonious kind of individual, there will be situations where the best approach with that situation is to lean slightly in grid, where we become increasingly amiable, aware of and caring for other individuals, seeing them, encouraging them to come forward. Remember, this little sub-quadrant here would be the driven amiable. So a driven amiable is an amiable, they care very much, but they that the driver element turns into a little bit of a stepping up to the plate sort of a thing to perhaps care for others, etc. Where we go even further in grid, and I like this part where you're talking about some of them are employed, they're out there doing their thing. Now, I think it's interesting. Part of them might be employed in the free market, but I know I've seen a lot of sweatshop sort of stuff as well, where they work for little or nothing because the individual who owns the company is holding whatever their documents are. And so there's always this threat looming over your head of being handed over to the authorities or whatever the case may be. And then you got these in-grid danger zone stuff, which is the real victims I'm talking about. So I think that we can all see that there's a lot of unhealthy aspects that could be manifesting itself this far in grid. Yep. So that only leaves us one spot, and that's the outgrid danger zone. So looking at this outgrid danger zone here, is that a healthy place, an unhealthy place? I mean, we saw all the rest right here, where we have intention and engagement, a little bit upgrid, mid-grid, downgrid, you know, these two bands right here. This is all really, really good. But
I think from a health standpoint, T, these people are burning themselves out.
Yeah.
And I don't see that as being a healthy spot on the change grid.
yeah, no.
That's where I see the mental and the emotional and the spiritual imbalance or the lack thereof is
Oh,
on that.
That's
in
what
that
they
area.
cultivate to remedy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's how I'm seeing it. I don't know how the rest of you see it, but that's what it feels like to me.
Well, that resonates very much when we did all of you went through your basic training in change works and we're talking about change grid maneuvers. I said that the best thing you can do for anyone who's in any danger zone is to cultivate the center. So anything you can do to move them center. Can you move them center? Well, I mean, if they're very far out in one of these extremes, it's going to take a lot more energy, a lot more effort to get them to center. But the remedy is to use those PowerPoint sorts of
T,
maneuvers. Yes.
my favorite tactic is appealing to nobler motives.
All right. And so give us an example of that if you have one handy from.
Oh, I'm sure you'd like this to work. I mean, you've done this before and it's worked out. I'm sure you enjoyed that more than it not working out.
Yep. So people appreciate you got positively acknowledged and recognized. Sure, that felt good. Yep. These people thrive on that kind of stuff. So, all right, but how is that unhealthy? Now, think about that. We're saying the individual that to a certain degree, taking on a challenge that puts your ability to the test is a good thing. You know, we talk about a balance between perceived ability and perceived challenge. Being in balance is not a guarantee of a positive outcome, right? Think about that. If I say I'm a 9 and the challenge is a 9, does that guarantee I'm going to do it and do it well?
No.
Why is that? Why would that? What's
Well,
wrong with the math?
I think there's a lot of other variables other than, you know, I'm up to the challenge and the ability. I think you have to, again, bring in other people, bring in other perspectives and et cetera. And I think of when you're out in the danger zone of, you know, the driven, I think that, you know, that's where sometimes I'm going to push myself and I'm going to make it happen no matter what.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
And you get sicker as you even try to do that. You know, the anorexics, you know, are the, you know, the ones who push themselves to the point of over exercising.
Yeah. over anything really,
Yeah.
if we think about that, because, you know, we've had discussions before about how all the different types of addiction and other dysfunctional sorts of behaviors, where they live on the change grid. And we played with a little exercise where we said we can pretty much predict what the alcohol of choice would be, or the drug of choice would be, or the behavior of choice would be for an outgrid addict versus an upgrid, an ingrid, or a downgrid addict. Everyone has their own kind of preferences. Well, what are people in the outgrid danger zone? People that are driven drivers. What kinds of
Amphetamines.
what they're after? What now? What you just said?
Amphetamines.
Yeah, back in the day, before amphetamines were amphetamines, what was their drug of choice?
Probably cocaine, right?
Cocaine. It's got to be
Cocaine.
something that, yeah, aggrandizes them. Yeah, so cocaine is the drug.
LSD. I think that goes back to when I was in my
That's
system.
that's the downgrid.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, well, only because here's the thing. I've never read all that much about LSD becoming addictive, but most of what was written about it was about people having certain life experiences, life awarenesses, whatever, because of LSD. And so it was kind of viewed more like, I don't know, a sacred ceremonial kind of a thing, as opposed to a drug someone would turn to every day. Those of you that have got more backgrounds in doing substance abuse counseling and things like that, was LSD a highly addictive kind of thing? Was that pretty common for people to get addicted?
When you heard the word counseling, I was on board, but no, it's not addicting.
Yeah, Shags, we missed most of that. So tell us again.
I don't believe it's addicting. It's certainly oh gosh. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
I
That's
don't
my,
think you'd ever eat if you were on acid all the time. I don't think you'd
yeah. I think you'd wither away to nothing.
forget to eat.
Yeah. So anyway, but my point is, I don't really remember it having those kinds of addictive properties. But what drew people to was this idea they were going to have some sort of psychedelic sort of experience that might transform their thinking, awaken them to a whole different kind of reality. You know, I think people were kind of in the vogue of the whole thing was using it as this, I want to say, I don't know, wild, but experience, life-changing experience. I wanted something a little bit more fancy than that, but there you go, life-changing experience. So we're on the chain.
I would say an enlightened and enhanced perspective of your present situation.
And so where on the change grid do you think someone who wanted to pursue the use of a drug for those purposes would likely to be, and where is the target of where they would like to be?
That's interesting.
Would you ask that again?
Yeah, so someone who's using LSD or one of these other drugs, it's being used more as an event than as an
What's
escape.
interesting though is it's now low doses, I understand, are being used in the treatment of depression.
Yeah, microdot. Yeah. Okay, so the question is, where on the change grid do people think that's going to move them? That's the first question.
Yeah, I think it moves up and out, or maybe down.
I think it's going to move them to the center.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I mean, my generation was the generation of that. I mean, that's what people I know who did it for, just to move them to the center, and have experiences around the center, that led to growth of some sort.
Yeah, where they could dissociate from their life as they knew it. Now, back in the day, I lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan, home of the University of Michigan, and a very rich and robust New Age community, and anything you can think of that would go along at a
One of those
venue.
places that had no drug problem, whatever drug you wanted, no problem.
No problem. Yeah, exactly. Well, there was a whole group of people who quietly said anyone who wanted to have an LSD experience could kind of sign up for one. And what you were actually signing up for was to have a team of monitors to kind of supervise whatever your experience was. So just to be sure you didn't get yourself in any kind of trouble or have any grandiose thoughts about your ability to fly. And so, yeah, because they always said that it was never supposed to be a drug that you would do in a non-supervised situation. So anyway, blah, blah, blah. So I think that drug's about moving someone on purpose to the center of the change grid so they could explore whatever was beyond the physical body that they were in, you know. So it's supposed to enlighten you and elevate you and all that sort of stuff. Where beer is supposed to move you where on the change grid?
Down.
Yeah, a little bit up initially, and then you're going to end up down. So, well, you know, that's how pretty much all alcohol works, doesn't it? So again, we could go around and say who's alcohol of choice. But getting on here,
Tequila.
yeah, well, outgrid danger zone. Let's look at that. An outgrid danger zone person has something to prove, even though no one's asked them to. So think about that. This is the person who's determined to make something happen, no matter what else goes on. They believe they're the superhero. Bring on the most difficult challenge because I've got the ability to really meet it hand on. You know, only I can do such a thing. Blah. It's all this like grandiose kind of feelings and beliefs about oneself. So all that's going on there. So what kind of alcohol do you think they drink? They go into a bar. By the way, what kind of bar do they go into?
Expensive.
Expensive. They're the ones that are hanging out at the steakhouses bars. That's where they would go, or some
They go to the-
five-star hotels bar. Yeah,
They go to the Scotch places.
they go.
Or
They
the
want
vodka.
yeah. They want
Scotch and cigar.
top shelf.
That's where I go.
Pardon me. Whatever it is, it's got to be the best. It's got to be the best. So, so that, you know, that's what they're kind of doing. They're doing something in order to prove something to themselves and to others. So remember, this is where narcissism lives, outgrid as well. And so, is there anything unhealthy at all about any stuff we've just rattled off?
No.
No, of course
No.
not. Yeah, there's nothing wrong
It
with being power
masks,
hungry.
you know, especially when you're talking like the outgrid, it masks the harm that you put yourself in. And so, you know, you mentioned cocaine, and now you're getting into, you know, the endorphin like opiate receptors. And
Yep.
so you'll get out there and put yourself in harm's way and just be okay with it. The challenge is it tricks your mind into thinking that you need that. And so now your mind is triggered for that.
Yep. And which is why it ends up becoming psychologically addictive far before it becomes physically addictive. So because the psychological addiction can happen instantly. All right, anyway, so I go like, so this is unhealthy, all the rest of these are unhealthy. And so I think it's interesting to notice that the change grid actually enables us to see where someone needs to maintain their energy in order to have a healthy outcome.
Mhm.
Is that interesting? So if we just said,
Yeah.
look, unless you keep yourself in situations that present you with moderately high challenges against which you have a moderately high ability, well, without that alone, how healthy can we be? So it's like health requires some sort of challenge or test to be present. Does that,
Mhm.
do you guys see that, agree with that? That for us to actually stay healthy, I have to be put to the test.
Well, I
You
have to
have
be
to
put.
be and choosing to be and get to are different to me.
Yeah.
Right, but you know, we could even say that's partly dictated by what stage of life someone is in too. Because
Right, that's what I'm
you
saying.
know, when you're
Yeah.
parents, you might be giving your children things that they have to do. And later on, I might have to convince you to do something, and then you're doing things because you either choose to or not choose to. And all I can say, it was a lot easier when you were a child. So, so I think that we got to think about this, that health is a deliberate choice.
Yeah.
Right? It's an intention that comes along with it. Because think about this, in order for the lion to eat, The lion must do what?
Hunt.
Hunt.
Yep.
It has to move. It's not like the antelope walks up to it and says, "You ordered a pizza." I mean, that's not the way that it works. Eating requires that animal to have its ability put to the test.
Of course, with
And
like vultures, it could just play dead until when
yeah, there you go.
walks
But look what a vulture. Now, it's very interesting because think about what a vulture as a. For a moment, I'm going to grant them sentience. So let's say they are a sentient being, and as an organism, as a species, they decided that the most effective way for them to cope was to be perfectly happy eating the leftovers of whatever else, whoever did the work to kill whatever got killed.
They
So
still have to circle and find it.
they still have to circle and find it. They have to wait. They've got tremendous patience
Yeah.
until they can all descend upon it. Then they fight wildly amongst themselves.
You're a lazy lion and it gets close. Bam.
Yeah,
Easy
right.
meal.
There you go. Another meal. Thank you. A little bird for
Like
dessert.
gators. Gators will just sit and wait too. They
Yeah,
don't
exactly
exert.
right. Exactly right. And so this is my whole point. It's kind of like, I think that among animals we consider to be healthy, they each in their own way are being put to the test. If no other way, then, well, eating, defending their territory. For a lot of them, mating ends up involving a whole lot of physical, what do we say, ability
Exactly.
to fight off.
They do it with no pockets and no money.
Yeah, yeah, right. And really very little conversational skills. So, like they can figure it all out. So I guess what I'm just saying here is that I can see how health requires some level of active engagement, active participation in whatever's going on. If I, as a creature, decide to not be very active at all, to withdraw myself emotionally from people and situations, or keep unluckily finding myself in these situations where I really am in a predicament, well, these are all unhealthy. I've got to do something deliberate to minimize the negative impact that these other options might bring my way.
It's very interesting to me because what you just described directly correlates with what T talked about in those 5 portals, but it aligns itself with what the World Health Organization's definition of health is. You know, I said my father worked with the World Health for many years in all the countries we lived in. What's interesting to me is most healthcare systems are not designed, although they look to the World Health for that definition, which says that health is a state of complete physical, mental, social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity.
Oh,
And none of it,
very
the many healthcare systems don't, again, address the totality of that definition, which is
right.
fascinating to me.
Right. They just want to repair you and send you back out.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
They don't
That's
even
right.
want to repair. They want to hide, just put a Band-Aid on.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting. As of yesterday, I am officially a recipient of Medicare. You may congratulate me.
Happy
birthday.
to you.
Yes, well, the birthday is not till June 14th, but you get Medicare at the first of the month or whatever. And so, well, I have a concierge physician who I've been using, since medical care got to be so ridiculously expensive. I went out and found that these direct pay physician models are really, really wonderful. And I'm going like, do I want to keep paying my $75 a month to have access to my doctor, or do I want to set that aside? And the biggest reason why I want to keep my doctor is because I can go in there anytime and I know he's as holistic as you're going to get. He's got 11 different things that he measures you on every time you go, and only 3 of them involve your body. So You know, it's really interesting about, you know, he asks about social, he asks about sleep, he asks about the amount of sun exposure that we're getting. He asks about, you know, what you're doing for enhancing the world and these sorts of things. And so it's a really interesting kind of practice. But because my recollection, and I had a great doctor when I was seeing a traditional doctor offered by insurance. I can't complain about her at all. She was one of the best doctors I've ever known. But you could tell that she was always under pressure to keep the appointments as short as possible. And it was a shame because she was about as little, what was the Mrs. Quinn, no, Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. Remember that TV series with Jane Seymour? That's the kind of doctor she was, you know, that you're her patient, you get her complete and total undivided attention and whatever it is, but you could just feel that she had to meet a certain quota every day.
Yep.
Patients being met because somebody at some point in time bought out her practice, but kept her on.
That's known as diagnose and adios.
Diagnose and audio. Where do you get this stuff from, Shags? It's
I
like,
don't know. It's a curse. I hear it and it sticks.
wow. It's like, do you get like resources delivered in the mail?
That's funny.
It really
And
is.
that describes it directly because it's the U.S. healthcare system is based on a fee-for-service model,
Yep,
and
yep.
it's based on volume. So although they're saying, yeah, we're going to transition from volume to value, because the government is the largest insurer, the paperwork to even get involved in that, physicians say, what's the point? Because I'm still bringing home paperwork. I'm still charting to qualify what value is in terms of outcomes. So it's not transitioning right. Like they don't have the full stakeholder perspective in terms of physicians and even patients and how this can interact. And so it's still going to take a while to, I think, realize the potential of it.
Yep, I think you're right. Tim, what you just wrote was very funny. Treat him and street him. I worked at Detroit. I worked at the medical center in Detroit for a good long while for the Poison Control Center, which was physically adjacent to the emergency room at Children's Hospital of Michigan. And so when nothing was happening in poison control, I would go out and sit in the emergency room, and I could still hear if our phones rang or anything, but I could, you know, interact with the triage team and the registration people in the emergency room. And I can't begin to tell you how often they said, treat them and street them, treat them and street them. Pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. And if you're going to admit them fast. We need the bay. So oh, very interesting, very interesting. All right, and so we have just 1 minute left. So let's just kind of think about this topic again about health span versus lifespan. So we can continue this on our next call, but based on what we've said about placement on the change grid for where health lives, do you believe it is true that the better job I do of maintaining my position on the change grid, the healthier I am going to be, and that health is going to extend my life in a healthy way? So it's not just living longer for the sake of living longer, because some people are blessed or maybe cursed with those genetics. But then,
yeah, I think you might say that it might enhance the quality. I don't know
right.
about the quantity.
Well, that'll be interesting. And so when you're talking about lifespan, Brian, you're talking about just plain days on the calendar.
Right, it's length of years. In fact, this is measured by even insurance companies. So it does have an impact on it. So they look at what's called QALYs and dailies. QALYs are quality adjusted life years, and dailies are disability adjusted life years. So for each disability, disease or any kind of surgical procedure that could lead to arthritis, those kinds of things, that will impact your dailies. And that impacts and even shorten to some extent lifespan. So all of these things impact your lifespans when we're talking about quality of life. My concern was that people are so focused on the lifespan, they want to live long. And I'm saying, okay, but what about your quality of life? You're still smoking, you're still doing all these kinds of things. That's not going to help you live long. think about how people work or used to work, for a gold watch and a pension for an organization for 40 years. Well, they're doing that, but then you're burnt out. So now all of your so-called retirement is spent going to the doctor because you didn't treat yourself well. And this so-called work-life balance is more work-life integration, is a different perspective from a health span perspective.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Good. So, all right. So that's what I want you guys to be thinking about on the next for the next call. Should we be focusing on lifespan, health span, or should we just focus on managing people's levels of tension? Because not only does health happen here, but a lot of other good things happen here. So we want to do that. We'll talk about that on our next call. I just need to do one thing. Nasir, if you could chat over to me your email address. You guys see that Tim is on the call. That's actually Nasir using Tim's, I guess, the link you guys get after you register for the series. And then you guys just click on that to get into the call. So all I need is if I have your email address, then I can send you your own registration link, and then it'll appear as you when you're in on our calls. Okay, so last minute thoughts, comments, questions, calls, concerns, anything?
This is good. Thank you for
Interesting.
exploring.
Thank you.
Very productive.
All right, good. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll talk again soon. Bye.
Good weekend.
Bye.
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 I know.